When we reflect upon the dark chapters of our history, wars inevitably come to mind, those tempests of human aggression and despair that have altered the course of history. From the countless expeditions and conquests of ancient civilizations to the bloody confrontations of the 20th century, wars have always been a part of our existence. Each war tells its own story, but all of them reveal a profound truth about human nature, our capacity for hatred, destruction, and self-destruction. Yet alongside this, wars also unveil heroism, solidarity, and hope that emerge even in the darkest of times. World War I was a shock to humanity, showcasing the brutality of modernization and military might. It highlighted how deep the divisions between nations could be and the horrendous consequences of ambition. World War II, with its unspeakable crimes and genocide, became an eternal reminder of where human hatred can lead. It opened the world's eyes to the need for international cooperation and understanding. Perhaps many of you believe that the onset of a Third World War may take place in the distant future, or possibly be triggered by the conflict between Israel and the Gaza Strip. However, some scholars argue that the first sparks of this global inferno were ignited much earlier. Russia's assault on Ukraine, in their view, marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of wars, opening the doors to the most significant confrontation since World War II. Why is this particular conflict considered a milestone on the path to the Third World War? Because a war of such magnitude has become a beacon for geopolitical shifts. It not only exposed a state's ambition and capability for aggression, but also highlighted the lack of global consensus and a shared desire to counteract breaches of international law. Each explosion of Russian shells in Ukraine heightened global tensions. Every instance of border violation worldwide weakened the bonds of friendship between countries, and global alliances became increasingly fragile. This conflict is not merely a regional skirmish, but a reflection of a global divide that deepens with each passing day. Every war has its face of horror, and this war of Russia against Ukraine is no exception. The grave crimes against humanity that occurred in Bucha, Irpin, Izium, and the sabotage of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, causing an environmental disaster of incredible proportions, made the world realize that the war in Ukraine isn't merely a regional conflict, but a catastrophe of global scale. The genocide unfolding before the eyes of the civilized world served as a reflection of the dark corners of the human soul. The torture of Ukrainian soldier prisoners became a stark reminder of the absence of humanity in war. The scars of this terror marked the streets of Ukrainian cities and villages, where lives were taken even from those who simply yearned for peace. Hundreds of towns and villages wiped off the face of the earth, left those who once called these places home without shelter. The horrors of war scattered them across the world, turning them into refugees seeking refuge from the storm of war. The modern world has faced a plethora of global challenges, accumulating tensions between nations and challenging the international order. These challenges, serving as catalysts of discord, may be leading us to a future that resembles the cold reality of a Third World War, more than peaceful coexistence. The Arab world. Political shifts, revolutions, and internal conflicts in Arab countries are creating uncertainty and tension. Wars in Libya, Syria, and Yemen continue to divide the region. Migration crisis. Mass migratory movements to Europe and the US, driven by wars and economic instability, are leading to political disagreements and social tensions. Russia and Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has showcased Russia's willingness to use military force to achieve its geopolitical goals, increasing global concerns. Israel and Palestine. The ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians remains the core tension in the Middle East. China and Taiwan. Discrepancies between China and Taiwan are intensifying, with threats of military intervention that might draw in other major powers. North and South Korea. The long-standing conflict between these two nations keeps the Korean peninsula in a state of military tension, which has the potential to escalate into a global crisis. All these conflicts and tensions are building a scenario where a global confrontation might become a reality. The precursors of World War III might already be forming before our eyes, necessitating global dialogue and efforts to prevent this potential disaster and maintain peace and stability in the world. History teaches us that technological progress often goes hand in hand with military development. In a world where nuclear weaponry becomes increasingly accessible, the threat of its use grows, and arms races can lead to catastrophic consequences. Nuclear weapons have always been symbols of military might and a deterrent factor, but the proliferation of nuclear weapons among countries in conflict or with unstable regimes increases the risks of their use. Traditional nuclear powers such as the USA, Russia and China continue to modernize their nuclear arsenals, adding further tension to international relations. Efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons face challenges due to the ambitions of some countries to attain nuclear status, creating additional pressure points on a global scale. The development of new technologies, such as anti-missile systems and hypersonic weaponry, introduces new levels of threat and complexities in the arms race. Every new step in the arms race pushes us further from the possibility of finding peaceful resolutions to conflicts and raises the stakes in the global power poker game. A world dazzled by technological advancements might find itself on the brink of a nuclear abyss if timely measures aren't taken to reduce tensions and limit arms. The nuclear threat not only reflects the terrifying reality of potential mass destruction, but also leads to further divergence among nations. Only global consensus and a commitment to nuclear disarmament can bring hope for a safer future for all of us. In a world riddled with countless conflicts and threats, the role of international organizations becomes increasingly critical. However, the inability of these organizations to effectively address crises and ensure a peaceful global order prompts reflection on their real weight and significance. During serious crises, such as the war in Ukraine, international organizations often prove incapable of preventing conflict or ensuring rapid and effective resolution. This reflects not only the structural and political weaknesses of these organizations, but also a deeper divergence among nations on core issues of international politics and security. The need to reform international institutions has never been as evident as it is now. The central challenges of our time require a new approach to global governance that reflects changing realities and ensures an effective response to global threats. The response to geopolitical threats often manifests in the form of increased military budgets, impacting national expenditure priorities and social programs. Innovative technologies allow countries to develop new types of weapons and modernize existing systems, enhancing their military capabilities. A third world war could have myriad scenarios, depending on the actions of countries and the international community. However, the scenario described below is just one of the possible hypotheses, which is not intended to predict actual events, but rather to demonstrate potential risks and threats. Most likely, a nuclear war will start not with a full-scale nuclear strike, but from a local military conflict that quickly escalates. Over time, states might attempt to use tactical nuclear charges with a limited radius for show of force. However, this can easily lead to a full-scale nuclear conflict as the other side responds in kind. The number of casualties in a nuclear war can vary significantly based on several factors. Scale of the war. Will it be a local conflict between smaller nuclear states or a large-scale war between major nuclear powers such as the USA and Russia? Number and power of explosions. Are only a few bombs used or entire arsenals? Targets. Were the targets large cities, military installations, infrastructure, or others? Post-explosion consequences. Nuclear winter, radiation fallout, and long-term health consequences. Social and economic repercussions. How effectively can a state respond to the crisis? What are the implications for food supply, medical aid, and other critical infrastructure? Based on models and simulations conducted in the past, some scientists speculate that a full-scale nuclear war between two major nuclear powers could result in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people directly from the blasts, and then hundreds of millions more from radiation fallout, starvation, diseases, and social chaos. There's also the theory of nuclear winter, suggesting that the vast number of fires caused by nuclear explosions could release so much smoke and dust into the atmosphere that it would block sunlight, causing a global cooling effect. This could lead to global ecological consequences and the death of a significant portion of the world's population due to starvation. Thus, the possible death toll from a nuclear war could reach into the billions when considering the worst-case scenario. Is there any way to protect oneself in such an apocalyptic scenario of nuclear war? Protection from a nuclear war is a very complex task that unfortunately does not guarantee complete survival in the event of a nuclear conflict. However, there are certain recommendations that might increase one's chances of survival. Shelter preparation. If you have a basement in your house, it can be converted into a temporary nuclear shelter. Protection from radiation is determined by the amount of material between you and the outside environment. The more earth or concrete, the better. Stock up on water and food for at least 2 weeks. Keep in mind that you will need at least 4 liters of water per day for drinking and hygiene procedures. Distance from targets. Large cities and strategically important sites, such as military bases or nuclear power plants, are likely to be primary targets. Living in the countryside or in smaller communities may reduce risk. What to do during an attack? If you see a bright flash on the horizon, do not look at it. Seek shelter immediately. If you are outdoors, lie down on the ground, covering your head with your hands. Stay in this position until the shockwave passes. After the explosion, stay in shelter as long as possible. The most intense radiation occurs within the first few hours after the explosion. Avoid food and water that might be contaminated. Protective clothing and cleansing. Upon entering the shelter, remove contaminated clothing and wash yourself. Masks that filter air can protect you from inhaling radioactive particles. Have a portable radio to keep track of updates from the government or local agencies. By following these recommendations, one can increase the chances of survival in the event of a nuclear conflict. However, the best protection is to work on preventing such conflicts on a global scale. World War III, especially a nuclear one, is not just a political conflict but a real threat to the existence of humanity. It is a warning to all of us about the need to seek ways for peaceful conflict resolution, avoid escalation of conflicts, and work towards reducing the nuclear potential globally. But one truth always needs to be remembered. No matter how formidable the enemy, regardless of their nuclear capability or their plans to annihilate one nation or another, in the case of Ukrainians, a powerful army and heroes give hope for a peaceful future. For the war to end, all that's needed is for Russia to leave Ukrainian land, because if Russia stops fighting, the war will end instantly. But if Ukrainians stop fighting for their land, they will cease to exist. Glory to Ukraine.